Honestly, I was a bit reluctant to making this video because it's been a minute since the launch of the final episode from the series, and in today's day and age, if you review something that's already a few days old, it could very well be considered a retrospective. Things are moving too fast for my own good and I'm but a snail surrounded by a colony of ants. The second reason as to why I felt reviewing this show was pretty much pointless is that New Frontiers is a fan-made series on YouTube. You can watch it for free. Like, the worst possible outcome for you would be wasting 3 hours and a half of your life, but realistically the majority of people decide whether they want to keep watching a sad show by the end of episode 1, so there's literally nothing to lose by giving it a go. But since the very creator of Titanfall New Frontiers insisted that I review his work, I had no other option but to oblige, so here we go. Bear in mind that this review isn't spoiler free, so consider this as a heads up if you think you want to watch the series first. Normally I'll start off with the good parts and then lay out the bad aspects of a movie or a game for that matter to sort of increase my view time, but judging by the statistics of the videos I've uploaded so far, that doesn't really matter because A, my main demographic is Gen Z and their attention span doesn't last longer than a well executed blowjob, and B, I want to end on a good note specifically for this video because believe it or not the show wasn't as bad as I thought it was gonna be. What I mean by that, you ask? Well, when Caleb Chamberlain, who's pretty much the backbone of this project, said that there will be some raw-looking content in it, it didn't take long for me to notice what he meant by that. The animation, especially in the first half of the show, was rough to watch. The main issue regarding the execution was a mix between glitchy, almost horror movie-like movement at times, over-the-top facial expressions, and the uncanny valley faces which were beautiful when still, but borderline scary when they smiled, cried, or expressed any type of emotion apart from surprise or snarkiness. And if you watched my previous video where I said that the jank was the least of my concerns, well, this still holds true. I tried not to focus too much on the animation because I suspected the producer wasn't really familiar with the software he was using prior to creating the series, which was later confirmed in the behind the scenes episode. That said, the visual part is usually what people hone in on the most, so I couldn't bring myself to just not talk about it at all. But yeah, you get my point. Something I wish I saw more of, the quintessential pilot ability wall running, was only shown once during the series, and as you might have already guessed, it didn't look great either. But seriously, what on earth was that? Believe me, I really don't want to be mean, but those light chassis titans running through the fields had me in stitches. It looked so awful, it was actually good. If there was one scene that I want to see completely redone, it was this one. Unfortunately, all the episodes are already out, so there's no going back, I guess. Sorry for the segue by the way, but that scene was just so funny I couldn't bring myself to not include it in the video. So yeah, anyway. A substantial chunk of what was supposed to be high velocity movement and dynamic close combat scenes were masked with clever usage of camera angles, strategically placed in screenshot worthy spots to sort of enhance the otherwise static fights and the eye gouging sliding every time a pilot landed on their feet, which I'm not gonna lie was a pretty clever cinematic touch. That said, the fact that the grunts were even worse than the NPCs in the game made a lot of what could have been among the most epic scenes in the show very anticlimactic and stiff. But seriously, despite the fact that grunts have neither pilot kits nor titans, they're still trained military personnel, and seeing them staying pretty much still upon noticing a pilot flying over their heads really pulled me out of my experience. Overall, the camera work was pretty decent. I would go as far as to say even great at times, with some screen shaking here and there as well as panning over to specific objects or characters in certain scenes while leaving the background out of focus, thus giving you that quote-unquote big screen experience. I've got nothing bad to say about the illumination and world design. Actually, this was probably one of the most thought-out aspects of New Frontiers, as the creators managed to do a great job with the breathtaking colors of a fiery sunset and somber bluish backdrop of an approaching storm. One of the things that left me pleasantly surprised was the use of a wide array of imported models from Titanfall 1 and 2, like spaceships, dropouts, textures for walls, weapons, titans, and so on and so forth. In fact, don't quote me on that though, I don't think Pilot Coalition omitted a single titan model, which really goes to show that despite all the flaws of the series, they really went an extra mile to give the fans what they want, unlike a certain publisher. And that pretty much sums up the purely visual section of the show. Now it's time to cover the audio and the voice acting, which much like the visuals was sadly a hit or miss. Starting off with the voice acting, a lot of the people who volunteered to be a part of New Frontiers had already had experience with acting, but not necessarily with dubbing, which I guess is better than having no experience at all. However, you could clearly tell the difference between actors who had been in a soundproof booth before and those who'd only spoken on stage. I don't mean to take away from the effort they put into the characters they voice, but again, this is an honest review after all, and as such I don't want to mislead people who decide to watch it by saying that everything in the series was perfect, or let my love for the franchise obscure my constructive criticism. With that said, some voice actors perform better than others. For example, the man reading haikus before the intro of each episode had an outstanding voice and delivery, and I think I've heard him before somewhere, but I can't really put my finger on it. But yeah, whoever that guy was... Actually, enough bullshitting around, we all know the voice of Viper, don't we? On to the next one, or rather the next two, the iconic duo Davis and Draws. I mean, yeah, those guys are like the ultimate tag team. They bounce off of each other so well that their banter never failed to entertain me. Almost as if they were born to play those roles, and even though what they say is 100% of the time the goofiest shite ever, it never comes across as overly cheesy or not fitting the tone of the series. On the contrary, they really lighten up the mood at the end of each episode in their cameos after a barrage of child trauma and death. So yeah, I can't stress enough how refreshing their performance was. Also, their animation was by far the best one out of all characters, which I suspect was due to the fact that most of the time they were sitting on a couch, watching TV, and the mocap sensors didn't have to do any extra work. So yeah, it's safe to say that Davis and Draws were without a doubt the most believable, naturally looking characters in New Frontiers. Justin Foster was the man who was given the near impossible task to replace Matthew Mercer in his role as Jack Cooper, and I'm just gonna say at first I thought there was some AI involved in this to emulate Mercer's voice and cadence and leave it at that. It was a total mic drop. And that's basically it regarding the performance of every Canon Militia character with screen time of more than 3 minutes. I thought their voice acting was a cut above the rest, and that was to be expected given their background. But we are far from finished here. There were also quite a lot of new faces, most of whom played minor characters, so I'm not gonna go over each and every one of them, or otherwise this video will exceed 40 minutes, which isn't really my goal. I will however touch upon the presentation of the 4 IMC personnel, Gila, Pyres, Nadim, and last but not least Celise, whose presence in New Frontiers was pretty much integral to the storyline of the show. So Gila is the first character I'll be covering. She is the only hero, rather anti-hero, that was voiced by 2 people, considering she also had 2 separate character models. One of her is a kid and the other is a young adult. Honestly, I found both of her voice actors' work a bit underwhelming, partly because maybe their recording gear wasn't up to par with that of people who literally live inside a recording studio, and also I'd say due to the ridiculous facial animations of the models failing to complement their voice lines. In my opinion, Gila had a lot of rage welling up inside of her, and Kay Boone never really committed, thus making the character's fury sound more like whimpers. Pyres on the other hand definitely had his moments. It was apparent that Roger Taylor put a lot of heart into his work, but his final monologue felt really staged, and also the way he replied to Celise after she told him she was gonna evac every single civilian on the planet they were about to suck dry with just a simple awkward "okay" were among the biggest dips in the show. Or maybe it was the subpar writing of those particular lines that did him dirty, and he tried his best to salvage them but to no avail. Honestly, a single one-liner after that "okay" bit would have made the odd silence preceding it a little less uncomfortable. Or maybe something along the lines of "but make sure your actions don't compromise our mission," or "tread with caution, Celise, there's too much at stake and a single error is one too many." But hey, it is what it is, I guess. Next up we have Nadim, and for some reason his voice in the behind the scenes segment of New Frontier sounded deeper and richer than in the show, but maybe his character tried to be a bit less menacing to young Gila, which by the way was dubbed by his real daughter, and I honestly thought this was pretty sweet. How many people get to do that in their lifetime? I'm guessing not many, so good on them for getting to share this wholesome memory. And now let's talk about Celise Refusa, the main character of the show. And before I proceed with my thoughts on the voice acting, I'm gonna allow myself to accusingly point my finger at the person responsible for Celise's design. First of all, giving a woman of such skin tone huge green eyes is borderline illegal, and now you're responsible for my soft spot for middle-aged women in military uniforms. Just throwing it out there. So now that I'm done gushing over her, I've gotta say, apart from her appearance and the absolute beast of a helmet she's rocking, I was a bit conflicted as to whether I should bring up the obvious lack of fire and passion in her voice during intense scenes, or just let it slide and treat it as a part of her composed personality. You know, the demeanor of someone who's seen a lot worse than the tantrum of a hot-headed tomboy of thinking she's the embodiment of the universal moral compass. On one hand, I really like Cindy's smooth voice, which reminded me of that auntie who just loves kids and all the children in the family adore her all the same, but on the other, I failed to see Celise's badass side coming through, mainly because, and I hate to repeat myself, none of the female voice actors really committed, especially when it comes to expressing negative feelings. So even when she was angry, it almost sounded like she was reprimanding her spoiled cat over knocking down her wine glass rather than exude authority and respect. And that pretty much concludes my take on the performance of the IMC voiceover artists. Some honorable mentions for the people who dubbed the Titans. They did a great job even though a lot of the work was done by a voice changer, but the near emotionless robotic cadence of the Titans mixed with very subtle inflections isn't exactly an easy feat to pull off, so props to Sherilyn and Evan Clinton for being incredibly consistent. When it comes to sound design, I think it was good enough considering the creator's time restraints and the incredibly low budget, or the lack thereof for that matter. And as I've already mentioned, even though disparity between voice actors and stage performance was almost palpable, mainly due to the fact that everyone had been recording themselves on their own device at home, there was quite a few surprisingly decent touches throughout the series, which I'm not gonna elaborate on for the video is already long enough. A good example of the audio going bad, however, was during that one scene where the IMC's main characters were having a chat at the canteen and Gil's voice sounded like she was speaking from the inside of a Pringles can. There were a few bits here and there where the voice lines were almost inaudible towards the end of the sentences and I had to roll back or even turn captions on to make out what the characters were saying. I will say though, the inclusion of sounds from the game, much like they did with the props, rubbed me the right way, and despite the fact that some of the sound effects felt a bit subdued, the overall bass-rich audio almost made up for what the show was lacking in that department. Also, plus 1 point for including the 40mm cannon, which is quite literally music to my ears and I can never get enough of the clanking sound it produces every time it fires a shot. Speaking of music, the original soundtrack was also among the better aspects of New Frontiers. It was used masterfully in different scenes to accentuate the feelings those moments were trying to convey. Honestly, I enjoyed every second of it, and in a way, Pilot Coalition went above and beyond my expectations by making different outro songs for each episode. Truth be told, I have nothing negative to say about it. Everyone who worked on the score did a fantastic job, however one track in particular stood out for me the most. That was the intro song called Fire by Diana Del Toro, and I can't say for sure if the person who composed it ever played the games, but after listening to it for the first time, in my mind I was like, yeah, she understood the assignment. The best way to describe this beautiful piece of music is if the band making it wrote a ballad. Everything from the lyrics and battle drums to the pulsing synths and spaceship button sounds in the background fit the theme of the original Titanfall 2 soundtrack perfectly. The song is only a little over 3 minutes long, yet it manages to express a surprisingly wide array of feelings in that short amount of time. Melancholy, hope, love, hesitation, uncertainty, nostalgia. Suffice it to say, if the other aspects of the show were as good as the intro song, I would have without a doubt given it a near perfect score. Okay, now that I've pretty much covered the whole audio-video section of Titanfall New Frontiers, I believe it's time to talk about the plot a little, so if you still haven't seen the show, now is the best time to type it in the search bar instead of letting me spoil it for you even further. I found the storyline good, I enjoyed it. In all honesty, it doesn't take much to make me watch a movie, just add loads of explosions and a simple recon or rescue mission and I'm in. The TLDW of the storyline is, the IMC are preparing to harvest a planet, while at the same time the militia are trying to sabotage their plans. Of course the IMC isn't too happy about that and they send their forces to deal with the opposition before they ruin more of their facilities. Meanwhile, the Blue Visors are preparing to evacuate everyone in case things start going south. Eventually both sides clash in an epic battle for what some people call home and others just a means of saving their own planet. The confrontation ends in what I'd personally call a win for the IMC, but I can understand why some might consider it a draw as well. Either way, the clear victors after all that ruckus are Brisk and his dogs picking up dead bodies only to resurrect them for the Apex games later. Truth be told, if I knew I was gonna become a part of this after dying, I'd rather stay dead. Just disintegrate my body, I don't want any of it. To be frank, I feel like the show nailed the simplicity of a typical military operations movie while adding some embellishments in the form of slow-mo scenes and cool POV shots. The main thing that set apart the story from a basic point A to point B type of scenario was the heavy focus on character development, which for better or worse took a lot of screen time that could have otherwise been used for adding more combat scenes. And in a way, I was glad we didn't get more action because, as I've already said, the fluidity of the animation could have used some work. I also believe that if New Frontiers was twice as long, it would have been able to make us care about the characters more, thus rendering certain scenes more impactful. What I really enjoyed though was the inclusion of silence, where silence was necessary, especially during moments depicting internal struggle and self-reflection. All in all, New Frontiers achieved what I feared it would have absolutely fallen short of, relaying Gil's backstory in a way that wasn't obnoxious and super cliché by seamlessly transitioning from current events to flashbacks. In fact, the subtle use of what I believe was chromatic aberration when Gil was reminiscing on her past was so delicate that it made me want to rewatch the show simply for those moments alone. But that wasn't the only reason why I wanted to press the play button once more. While episode 1 through 4 weren't what I hoped they were gonna be, in 5 and 6 I saw a massive improvement in terms of animation quality and the long overdue restraint when it comes to facial expressions. Despite the fact that New Frontiers didn't make us pick a side, the message it tried to get across was clear. Human life is precious and worth fighting for. Frankly, I'm not sure if my favorite moment was Ulysses' swan song or Cooper's final act of philanthropy, but for what it's worth, those two scenes solidified my stance on whether Titanfall New Frontiers is worth your time or not. And at the end of the day, I think it is. You may not be aware of what simulacrums or striders are. You may very well be oblivious to the fact that the final fight literally depicted one of the game modes in Titanfall 2, but you'll definitely catch the metaphor for Jack atoning for his killer's wrongdoings, Ulysses' desperate struggle towards redemption, Pyrrhus losing everyone he cherished, and Gil's yearn for a warm hug. Titanfall New Frontiers is far from perfect, but it showed that there are people who still care. It showed that despite Respawn not as much as wishing it saw this player base happy 10th anniversary, there are still guys who'd go out of their way to make sure we celebrate the occasion together with their own fan-made series. It showed that the spirit of Titanfall still lives on, not in EA's pristine clean offices and huge logos, but in all of us, the players. Thanks for watching, like the video if you enjoyed it, wouldn't mind a sub either, and yeah, I've got another rather long and also a bit controversial video coming up soon, so make sure to hit that notification bell too. And yeah, stay awesome guys, I'm out.